assistant for a software company. And from there, I started to go into HR, which was documenting policies as we grew, as we kind of hired people, which segued into technical writing and knowledge management. So this is not something I specifically went to school for. When I was kind of finding my feet after leaving teaching, it's something that I really didn't necessarily consider as a viable path for me. And then while I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I found a lot of the resources that were out there are not specifically geared towards people who are pivoting. They're just intended for people who are already in the field. Right? So my journey was a little non-traditional. Currently, I am the documentation program manager for a remote software company, but I have worked for a variety of different places. I was head of education and documentation for a makerspace where I did physical tech, devices, all kinds of fabrication. I worked in video games for a little while. So technical writing can really take you a lot of different places, and we're going to talk about what that means today. I would be remiss if I did not address the economy up front for everybody. The job market is terrible. Tech in particular is contracting. We hired so many people during the first couple of years of the pandemic because everyone was at home and because funding, was in a weird situation. And now we're seeing a lot of layoffs, kind of adjust that. On top of that, we're having all of this political and economic instability that's leading to a lot of questions that we just don't have answers to. You're going to hear people talk about something called the white collar recession, which 100% affects tech and affects tech. It's people who have jobs that are being downsized for whatever reason. So I want everybody who goes into this to kind of understand, like, any pivot, it takes time. You need to expect it's not going to happen overnight. It's easiest to do if you have some other job while you're kind of pivoting into it or learning. And, patience is definitely the way to go for this, especially now when everything is so uncertain and there are a lot of dedicated, experienced professionals in this field who are already searching for work. So what is technical writing? Let's talk about this a little bit. It's, in bare bones, conveying complex information in a clear, concise, and accessible manner. So it focuses on taking something that's really complicated and breaking it down and making it easy to understand for a specific audience. That audience could be non-technical people. It could be technical people who are in a specific industry, who have a certain level of, base understanding. It could be a lot of different things. And part of your job as a technical writer is to know that audience and then adjust what you're making based on that audience. The end product could be a manual, report, set of instructions, but the goal is to make sure that anybody in your desired audience can follow whatever you spit. So take a look at these two pictures, which I think are just friendlier than big walls of text. Both of them tell you how to do the same thing. But which one would you rather follow if you had to completely approach this not knowing what the end product looks like, not knowing how to actually? I'm going to guess everybody likes the other one and not the first one, right? It's pretty clear. It shows you what to do. It has written directions for each image. There are directional arrows that tell you how to actually manipulate the material. The beginning and the end product is very clear. And this is just a very good example of technical documentation, whether it has images or not, right? You want clear directions, concise information. If you do have images, you want them to do quality. The images in the first one, like, what are the hands doing? Is it a smiley face? You don't know. It could be a lot of different things. And the established goal, which both of these do, you can kind of see step 3 in the wrapper picture and then step 16 in the actual screen folding picture. It's the same goal. But the way that you describe getting there is what separates really good technical writing, properly crafted technical documentation, from just a plain old set of directions that kind of assume, okay, you're going to do. Types of technical writing products. So like I said, my background has been a lot of places, but the majority of my career has involved software in some way. So most of what I'll cover with you today will be about software, but these work across all industries. End user documentation. Your end user is the type of person who's going to be using the thing you make at its end state. And that can be manuals, help guides. It's made for consumers of a product or service, and it explains how to use that product. Then we have technical reports, which are more detailed documents that present things, data, research findings, technical specs. These are more commonly seen in scientific or engineering fields. maybe like a little less consumer focused, or if they're aiming towards consumers, they're aiming towards consumers who already have a certain amount of technical. Then we have proposals, and this is a specific area I included so you know about it, but I don't have a ton of experience in proposals. They outline plans or suggestions for projects. These are used in a lot of academic environments. We're talking about grant writing, if you're submitting things to the government and saying like, we want to do this, funding. Commonly, they're just a very specific niche form of technical writing. And then we have your good old instructional manual, which is more educational content designed to teach or instruct you on how to do a topic or a process. That's training, academic settings. Technically, when you think about it, technically, an instruction manual could be a book. Like a textbook is an instruction manual. It's teaching you how to do a thing, but so is that little bifold you get in your IKEA furniture that comes and tells you where to put the pegs. So these are very broad topics that can cover a lot of different. So today we're going to cover two main areas: software, which relates to computer programs and coding, very straightforward. And then also what I'm going to bucket as hardware and manufacturing. And by this, I mean things that relate to physical, tangible products or devices. Now, sometimes and frequently, in our increasingly digital world, that overlaps with software. I mean, how many times do you buy a physical product that you hold in your hand, but then it involves doing something with software? It's swiping on your cell phone. It's doing things on your desktop. It's turning on your Amazon home devices. All of these different things are part of that little bucket of hardware. In other industries that we won't talk about as much today, it also includes like machining parts for actual physical nuts and bolts that you buy at the hardware store. It's anything that doesn't involve software. I don't want to paint the picture that like it has to include software to be technical writing. Technical writing can cover a variety of technical things, not just things that relate. All right, a couple quick terms so that everybody can kind of follow along with what we're going to do. And I'm including this because this is also a very good example of technical writing, right? I asked in the beginning, what is everybody's base level of comprehension? What have you done before? And that kind of gives me an idea of what the audience I'm communicating a concept to has coming into the experience. I always like to include glossaries in my technical docs that are long form. Or if it's multiple documents, they have a place to go to look for that terminology. And that could be things like when you're coding, what is a text editor? Or it could be for our particular product, we call this thing the fun menu, right? It's something that's specific to what you're talking about. It could be branded, it could be industry specific. You have to assume that somebody who's coming into this might not necessarily know what that means. And it's difficult to build comprehension on topics when you don't understand the building blocks first. So for us today, technical writing is also going to be synonymous with documentation, or for short, in the industry, we just call them docs. You're writing the docs, you're making the docs. The product, this one's a little trickier, is both the thing you are selling, whether that's a physical product or software, the work you are aiming to do, so the end product is a doc, and then in software and in design of physical things, it's also the name for the team within a company that works to design and build that. So when people talk about products, sometimes it's good to take a step back and be like, which of these do you mean? Because I need to talk to product can mean a lot of different things depending on the company that you're working for and the client that you're serving. The end user, I mentioned this a little before, but the end user is the person who's going to be using the finished thing and reading your docs. So this can be the person who's swiping on the cell phone and using the text in the app. This can be somebody who is reading the IKEA pamphlet to assemble the furniture. It could be the student in the classroom who's using your textbook. It's that end audience that you have to keep in mind the entire time you're writing your product. And the end user is just the general term we use to describe that. And finally, a developer. This has a couple of other synonyms in the industry as well, and it really just depends on who you're talking to. Like Canadians will sometimes prefer one or the other if you work with international teams. A developer is also a dev, is also a software engineer, a person who writes code to build software. Typically, developers are not always the same thing as technical writers. They may do documentation, but when we say developer, it does not necessarily mean the person who's doing documentation. Let's go back to that knowing your audience topic. There's a lot to think about when you're taking into account who your end user is going to be. And that's not just technical know-how, it's also socioeconomic and geographic differences, right? Is this person in the United States or the European Union? That can relate to not just language, but also this wonderful magical piece of legislation called the GDPR, which the United States does not have. It affects how your data is processed and stored and how you are allowed to refer to that data. So when I am writing documentation, if that person has the possibility of being in the EU, there's a completely different set of guidelines that we have to, even though the United States does. Is that person a digital native? So a Zoomer who was born with a cell phone in hand, or someone who was born before cell phones? Is it someone who's old enough to have really witnessed first computers, right? Do we have to explain the physicality of the device that we're using in a really granular level, or is it just going to be assumed that this is something they already know how to do? Same thing when you're talking about software. Are they a developer? Do they not code? That's a really big, important dividing line in the software industry. Are you talking to people on the product team who frequently don't code? Or are you talking to people who are in the back end, making the actual thing that you're doing and will understand if I send them just a code snippet with zero context? The last bucket I think that's helpful is it a new customer or a repeat buyer? And for both software and hardware, this is a really important distinction. Is this someone who is familiar with your product, like you upsold them? This is a new feature, but they already understand how everything works, and you only have to get them up to speed like 10%. Is this somebody completely new who needs the entire thing? And not only that, this is their first experience with your brand, with you as a group or a company. You want it to be a little friendlier, you want it to be more introductory. And that's where you start to kind of get into this other area of writing called copy editing or marketing. It's important to note that that is not technical writing. There is overlap there, but they are two completely separate fields. I would never hire me to be a marketing copywriter, and I would be really hesitant and need to see a full portfolio to hire someone with a marketing copy background to prove that they can do technical writing. The voice is different, the goal is different, their thought process is different. And typically copywriters do not have the kind of embedded skills with developers that you need when you're working in software. So this is a message that's conveyed to the end user that sometimes comes from several different writers, not just technical writers, depending on the experience and the scope of that engagement you have with that person who's buying your thing. All right, let's start with hardware and the manufacturing side of things. This will be a little shorter. So some examples I've included smart home devices, just because these are all physical devices that we are all seeing increasingly that have a very detailed back-end coding interface, whether you use them or not. You might click things on the app on your phone, but every time you do that, every time you speak to your Alexa or your Google Home, every time you click a button on your Nest thermostat, there's a lot of unseen technical magic in the background that is happening to process and allow these things to do the things you want them to. There's a ton of documentation, both for internal company purposes and external company purposes. So somebody internally is documenting all the proprietary stuff about that device that you, the consumer, doesn't need to know about, so that that company can use their IP to the best of their abilities to continue to make money. It also covers medical devices. I know I saw at least one person in the chat who said that they had some medical background. When I was managing education for one of my previous companies, we incubated medical device startups. So I have a little bit of experience in that area. Philly, in the past, has put a lot of eggs in the basket of what they call eds and meds. The idea that we have a bunch of colleges here, those colleges are going to churn out graduates and grad students who are then going to work in medical development, and that includes a lot of devices. So it's something that geographically, we do have a little bit of a history here. Currently, I'm curious to see what happens there just because of all of the funding changes that are happening in academia and how that's going to affect medical devices and medical for Philly. But provided that those companies still exist, there's a very decent community between Penn and Drexel and a bunch of different local colleges for device development and the software that goes with making those potential devices work. And then we have your consumer products. This is non-digital tech, I'm kind of lumping in a bucket, and I'm probably oversimplifying. I know some people who are in specific industries would say like, oh, there's 5 industries in here, but for our purposes today, IKEA furniture, cooking or cleaning appliances, look around the room you're in now. All of these things that you bought from places had assembly and manufacturing manuals. Whether you see them or not, some technical writer told someone how to make it, fix it, how to manufacture. Hardware specific documents. This is something I think that is not going to come as a surprise, but when you're putting something together physically, you want a good drawing to tell you how to do it. And so more than software, you're going to see drawings and diagrams for these particular types of products. They tell you descriptively how to move components in a physical space. So let's go back to the IKEA example. Putting pieces together, putting hardware into other things, how you twist things, how you make the direction, which direction the force is applied from. That increases tenfold when you're talking about very sophisticated and fine-tuned manufacturing. The picture I showed here is a machine part. So this is a machine that makes something else. It can be very technical. You have to explain how these things go together, but also likely you're assuming that that person has a higher level of base understanding for that technical concept, right? The person who's assembling the IKEA bookcase is not going to be expected to understand this particular. This also includes the paper product manuals. So the drawings can be used for a variety of different purposes. They can serve a variety of different end users. And technical drawing in and of itself it's an art. It's a completely separate field. I know some technical writers who can do both. They're like a contractor who's a one-stop shop. And I know some people who specifically only do one or the other. It really just depends on who you're working for and what your skill is. What you should study if you're interested in this particular field. So not the software portion, but the hardware and machining and manufacturing. There's something called the ANSI Z535.6. It's safety related documentation standards. So you follow it if you're talking about like how to safely navigate and make something on a shop floor. There's symbols. I also see some people taking notes. I'm sending everybody a PDF that signed up for this after with all the links to the stuff that I'm going to talk about today, so you don't have to scramble and put all that together. But various industries will also have different guides. So, the terms that you use properly in something like making a cabinet will be different than the terms that you use properly making kids' toys. The types of materials you're using, the end user, the safety guidelines, all of that's going to influence the style that you adopt to be able to talk about this thing. And just for anybody who, needs a little help with style is like a set guideline that you follow to craft your work. If you're in academia, like it's a little bit like citation styles, like APA, Chicago, AMA, all of the different things. Different industries are going to have their own flavor of how to tackle it. Terminology, you want to learn about materials, processes, quality control. This is a really big thing. What separates something that is properly made from something that's a problem? Then common physical component terms. What's a chamfer? Dovetail? How does a nut interact with a collet? These are all things that are helpful to know if you're going to be repeatedly using different types of pieces in an industry that uses those types of pieces. For tools, a good old text editor is helpful. Just know how to use it. But also there's more complicated document editing software for document files intended to be printed. That's a really important distinction. Like a lot of software documentation lives in the cloud. It's on a website, right? If you're actually going to be reading a pamphlet, it's helpful to know something like, different Adobe programs or the freeware equivalents, just so that you can say, I can take text that I write and put it in layout software and submit it to somebody to have it actually like be spit. With that graphic design standard, like I said, if you can make an image, it can be helpful. It's not mandatory, and nobody's expecting you to be a technical drawing master, but it's a nice adjacent skill. Medical devices in particular are going to have different needs from furniture, electronics, all these different things, like I mentioned. So, I would say if you are interested in one particular industry, start there, narrow it down, and try to see what that industry requires so you don't stop. Now we're going to move on to software. This is the biggest chunk of what we're going to talk about today. There are 3 different types of software applications. There is mobile, so that's all the apps on your phone. There's web, that's the stuff you access in a browser. So that could be a phone or a desktop. And then there's desktop apps. These are the ones that you download to your PC and actually use. A lot of times these days, those are like bigger, heavier programs, CAD programs, like really big programs that have installation requirements for the device. You might have a developer who can do one, who can do all. There are people who specialize entirely in mobile. They do. And there are companies that only want to hire somebody who's just going to work in mobile. You might have people who only work in desktop. It really depends on the industry. It depends on the person. Mobile is growing because everybody has a cell phone. Desktop typically is shrinking just because there are fewer apps that are sold. That's why a lot of them are now cloud-based. It's just easier to push updates. It's easier to manage from a continuation perspective. But all three of these use technical writers. All three of these have technical documentation. All three of these fall under the bucket of. Speaking of software, okay. This is a concept called docs as code. You'll recall docs in the documents, means the thing we're writing. You'll see it on certain job postings. It is not universal, but it is growing. I would say, in my opinion, higher paying jobs tend to be demanding this method. It's become more popular in the last 5 to 10 years, requires more coding knowledge. The idea is you're going to write the docs with the same tools as you would write the code. So code editors, being able to actually read a command line, looking at all those numbers on the screen and roughly understanding a little bit of what they mean. There are certain languages that relate to this that you'd be expected to know. For example, Markdown, HTML, XML, which is a little bit older. There are a couple of others. But some language at this point is pretty much required to be able to apply for a technical writing job that requires this. You're going to work with developers. That's the big difference. Developers will a lot of times write the first draft after they've written their code with some kind of writing software integrated into the product team. And then they'll send you, the technical writer, the markdown file and go, what do you think? And it's your job to read that markdown file through the code and tell them if it's plain English that it spits out makes sense to people who can't read. So you're kind of the go-between from these two levels of technology. Both of you are going to feel ownership on the documentation. It's a very collaborative process, and the engineers do their documentation, which is not always. Sometimes it is pulling teeth. Sometimes it's difficult. But there is an automation component to it. It allows you to help with testing and deployment of the documentation. You can also track changes, which is really helpful for version control. Something you might not be aware of is when a software company releases a new feature, it doesn't always work. Depending on their philosophy, sometimes they didn't test it, sometimes they didn't like partially release it, and you have to do what's called a rollback. And that means we're not going to be releasing this feature now, or it was too buggy, we're cutting it, we'll bring it back out in a couple weeks. So V1 of your docs might look radically different than V2 because the thing was broken, you figured it out, and now it's up to you in this docs as code approach to work with the development team to figure that out and spit out V2 so that. Update considerations. So when I talk about versioning, that relates to this term version control, which is keeping a record of which version of a document has been released at which time, so that you can both ensure that people are using what's current, but also determine what's out of date. And this is really important for scenarios where maybe your document is a PDF that's emailed to people instead of it being hosted live on the internet. Maybe your customer doesn't check their emails all the time, or they were on an extended medical leave or something, and they come back and they're still using this thing that is now V4 when really you're V4.3. And so there are subtle differences there. The V numbers and then keeping records of what's changed between those versions allows you to maintain accurate documentation and point people in the right direction if they've fallen behind. This kind of relates to the idea of iteration. So every update to software should, in theory, mean an update to its documentation, not fixing typos or anything like that. But if there's a new feature, if the appearance of the software changes, your documentation needs to be updated to match that. If you have screenshots that walks people through click here, point here, and now it's click here, point here, you got to go in and switch all of that. That's your job. You want to collect feedback from your end user. What the readers feel when they're going through your documentation, their ease of navigating can really notify both you, your writer, on how you're doing. but also the product team on the errors and things that need to be. So if you roll out a feature that seems really great to developers, maybe even you, the technical writer, if you're in a docs as code approach and it makes sense and you're getting all this feedback of what is this, that's really good to know. It means you overshot your level of technicality, or something's not working that you didn't anticipate, or your end user's using it in a way that you didn't anticipate. Finally, release notes. And the picture that I have here is an example of Slack's release notes, which if anybody's ever used Slack, it's like a chat app that started with developers, but I know other businesses use it now too, similar to Discord. They put out, you can see 4.14.0, that's a versioning stamp. They're telling you this is the date that the release went out. Here's a high level what's new, and here are all the mistakes from something previous that we fixed. And at the very bottom, here's guidance about how to navigate this for security concerns. So release notes should be small, bite-sized documentation that lets users know what changed, what you need to investigate, what you need to update. It's not full-on technical documentation, right? It can link out to big old technical. There should be like the summary that is the TLDR for everybody to know what's going on and where they. What you should study if this is interesting. Style. Software companies decide on their own style. It's a personal in-house decision. It's not as strict as like Chicago or AP style or something like that. Still a little kind of figuring that out just because this is a new world. But we have identified that both Google's guidance and Microsoft's guidance are kind of the industry standard. If you're documenting something and you're trying to figure out how do I refer to this weird menu or the action of clicking this thing, I always start with Google. If Google doesn't have it, I go to Microsoft. If they have conflicting information, I pick the one that I like. And then I include it in our in-house style guide, and that's what we follow. Consistency is really the important thing because you're assuming your reader's going to keep reading your docs over and over and over again. So you want to make sure if you're saying like click, you're continually saying click. If you're referring to something as the blue wibbly, that will always be referred to as the blue wibbly. You never change the thing you call it. It's a point for your UI terminology. So UI is an industry-specific term that means user interface. There are people, their entire career is UI design. They have standardly like assigned terms to certain elements on a page. And these are documented in the Google and the Microsoft guidance as well. Think like a drop-down menu. Looks like a specific type of menu where you click and something appears. Checkbox, it's a square that you click on and it makes a little check mark or it selects it. And ordered list, numbers, not bullets, right? UI terminology is really good to know if you're interested in software writing because that is something you're expected to follow. The idea is that your users are using other software and other apps, other technical things. They're used to those terms. You want to be able to refer to those terms so that your tools, your tech stack. Every company is going to write documents in their platform of choice. I have been maybe 8 companies in the last 10 years. And every company has used their own different choice. So I think being able to navigate and switch between platforms is actually a very attractive skill. So when you're telling people, yes, I know how to do this, it's better to say, I can do this in these 5 things than it is to say, I only know this. If you know one brand, you can kind of talk your way into other brands of the same sort of. I find that's harder to do if you're talking to recruiters because they don't necessarily know the industry. Like if someone told them, oh, I need them to know Canva and you know Adobe Illustrator, they might look at that if they're not particularly educated and say, but you don't know Canva, and then click out of that resume, which is the opposite of what you want in that scenario. So it really just depends on who you're talking to. Languages is another really important component of this. I mentioned like if you're going for a docs as code approach, you should have some literacy. It doesn't hurt even if you're not going as a docs as code approach. It allows you to kind of jump ahead and be a little more valuable to the teams that you're working with. Markdown is a great one to start with. The guy who invented the language is actually from Philly, so very home-based language, but it's the simplest. From there, you can branch out into JSON, restructured text, CIDOC, HTML, CSS, all different types of things. And there are some great tools, which I'll send out in that PDF to help you learn and practice different types. What about AI? Let's talk about this as well, because I know it's something that every writer in every field right now is thinking about really constantly, really regularly. It is a reality that we need to face. I think that's the short version. If you are ignoring AI right now, you are in the process of making yourself obsolete. Ignoring the tool and refusing to learn how to use that tool is the thing that will make it difficult for you to use your skills professionally going forward. The tool itself is not going to make it difficult for you to use your skills. Tech writing, something that a project that might have taken 5 humans to complete now realistically could take 1. But that 1 human is going to spit information out of a large language model, which is your chat GPT, the different tools that you use, take that information, restructure it, format it, proof it, and then call it documentation. So the number of people that are doing this, human bodies, is probably going to shrink, but those bodies are going to need these skills to move on. It's important to realize that AI makes mistakes. And this is something like all of us as writers really need to hammer home, regardless of the field you're in. AI sounds really self-assured. It sounds like it knows what it's talking about, right? But it could tell you that the sky is black. And somebody needs to point that out, right? Technical documentation in particular. What I've seen a lot of companies do is they'll train their own model, or they won't train a model. They'll just say like, hey, chat GPT, how do I make this shape in this piece of software? And then they won't actually go in and test it against the product. They won't actually like go through, read it, and make sure that what it does. And that's where human comes into play. You need to, the AI is your assistant. AI is your tool. It's the thing that is going to be giving you information, but it's on you as the technical writer to make sure that that information is proofread, verified, properly styled, vetted, and then posted. So upskilling, that's the short version, I think. Just try to explore it, use it. One important thing to note about AI is that not all uses of AI are secure. Like if you are at a technical company and you are using something, we talked about like proprietary information, right? If you go pasting that into a public instance of ChatGPT, you're feeding that proprietary information to something you should not be feeding it. So if you're going to be using AI for a company, you should always be having discussions of where are we sanctioned to use AI? Are these models internal only? Are they information that I'm putting into it being used to change models that are going to influence our competitors or other people who could charge us money down the road? So using it responsibly in a way that doesn't violate anything you've signed up to do as a technical writer is important. But right now, fortunately, there are a lot of really good free training resources, webinars, cheat sheets. You can just explore with ChatGPT for free. It's still free. OpenAI has not charged for it yet. So this is the time for you to go out and kind of play and learn in a way that doesn't cost you a ton of money. Down the road, we don't necessarily know if this is something that will be in the same way. Could be something that evolves. Now is the time. Portfolios. I want to talk about this just because I think when I was trying to pivot into technical writing, this was one of the weirdest pieces for me. Because how do you show off skills that you want to do if somebody hasn't already paid you to do that thing, right? How do you show somebody I can do this and somebody should pay me money to do this without proof that you have done it? My advice is pretend. Make a website. If you are a technical writer in software, it's unacceptable to apply for a job and not have a website or a digital portfolio of some kind. It can't be paper. It can't be something, that you just mail to somebody. They need to see that you have that literacy to use those technologies. Make your own projects. So if you want to do something that it's docs as code, it's going to require Markdown, make your own Markdown file. And then after you make a Markdown file, then show what you would plug that file into to make a document that the end user sees. And then talk about how you would iterate that document based on changes that come out, right? Explain the process. Process is a really important part of technical writing because you can show that you both can follow directions, not just write them, but that you understand how to work your way through that development cycle of making a thing, presenting the thing, updating the thing. Also have a resume. Don't just have a portfolio. You want both, depending on the industry. My background has largely been startup companies, small companies. Some big companies have very specific formats. Sometimes they have job application software that's like screening for certain things. Be flexible in your materials, but don't over design things. Don't make it, too complicated. And then just keep practicing. Practice, practice, practice. When you're comfortable with one tool, move on to another tool, move on to another version of the tool. And then your list of the things that you know and the things you can brag about doing grows. Maybe somebody's looking for somebody who understands Notion. Do Notion. But then somebody else could be looking for Confluence. Jump and learn Confluence. All right, that was a lot. I do have a little quickie practice exercise for us before we get to like time for Q&A. So what I'd love for you to do is take out your phone, open up the email app on your phone, go to compose a new email, and then step into any kind of text editor on your computer. If you're on a phone, you could do this on paper next to you too, write it out by hand, that's fine. But I want you to document the steps of how you just did that thing. How did you pick up your phone all the way to compose a new email? And I'll give you about 3 minutes. All right, everybody wants to finish up. I'm going to share my answer, and you can compare how I would do this to what you chose. Enter the passcode or use the fingerprint scanner to unlock the tap to open your email app. Use the word tap because this is something that's kind of industry standard for the action of what you do on a phone. You don't click on a phone, you click on a mouse, tap. And then click to compose because there's an actual button in that app, right? Whenever you're clicking on a button, clicking, you're not tapping, regardless of the in the to field. Note that the to field is bolded, so was compose. Bold is something that's only used to denote certain elements of the UI. So because compose is the word that was on the button for my mail app, it's bold. To field is the label under the field, so that's bolded. If sending a message to multiple recipients, separate each address with a comma. Use the contacts drop-down selector. There's that UI element that I talked about. To add recipients from the pre-existing contact list. And contact list is another standard that you use to talk about where your contacts are. In the subject field, enter the purpose for the message. Enter the email text in the composed email canvas, which is another word that's used to describe that particular type of word. Change font and style as desired using the settings in the formatting toolbar. Click Save. So this is how I would do it as somebody who documents software. If you had asked me to do this 10 years ago, before I was really familiar with all of these things, it would have looked very different. And I guarantee for a lot of you, yours looks different too, right? This is the value of knowing your style, of being comfortable with the UI elements, of thinking through the process of clicking and actions all the way to satisfaction of the thing that the end user is trying to do. It is simple, it's fairly elegant, but it also outlines all of the steps so that if someone gets lost, you're not asking them to make a very large jump, which in software, I think alienates the user. If it just said, click to compose, click send, you'd lose all of that information in the in-between, which is really helpful for knowing how to use the different features. Being comfortable using the different features lets you spend more time in the product. Spending more time in the product, if you're paying for that product, means that you are a stickier customer and are more likely to contribute money, which is the entire purpose of what you are trying to do as customer, right? Get people to use their product, stay with their product, pay more for it. So now what? I in that PDF that I'm sending out, I have a list of communities. There are a lot of good technical writer focused communities you can join to both see job postings, learn resources. The most well-known one for software is called Write the Docs. They also do a little bit of other types, but mostly software. LinkedIn is terrible. We hate it. Make one anyway. If you don't have one, you need one to just, provide a professional presence, to have people take you seriously. Realize that LinkedIn should not be Facebook. LinkedIn should not be TikTok. You need it to be a professional presence to show people that you are capable of making a professional persona. I tend to keep my personal writing separate from my professional writing, just because they're two separate spheres. You don't have to. That's just my preference. But if you are going to do LinkedIn, pursue that thinking about it as a professional resource. Recruiters click on it. People see everything you do. Can't stress that. Over, the next period of time, start to notice when you read good directions for something in your everyday. Is it the back of a milk carton that tells you how to make cookies? Is it a piece of furniture that you bought? Is it an app that had like little pop-up bubbles that told you how to do something and you're like, oh, that's cute, I like it. Notice it and think a human did that in some form. Even if AI helped them draft it, a human made the decisions as to what AI had to draft. They prompted it to do it. They're communicating that concept to you in a way. What makes it good? What makes it bad? Learn from it. And then write so much. Just keep practicing. Do it for things that you have in your home. Do it for processes that you do, even if it seems like really mundane. One of the first technical writing jobs I got, the interview question is they asked everybody to describe how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And if you can describe that in a way to a person who's never seen a sandwich, who doesn't know what peanut butter is, how can you then think about other things going down the road? So it doesn't have to start really highbrow. You can start with them. And then those resources that I sent you, you can pick at them, you can practice. It's not going to happen overnight, but you can definitely make sure, like, by doing things repeatedly, you'll become more comfortable with it. You'll be a little closer to feeling like you can actually talking to people in these industries, understanding what they're saying, and presenting the case for why they should like things for them. Are we done on time? So we have like 8 minutes or so. I wanted to leave a little bit of time for Q&A. Just anything, questions you have about anything we talked about today, anything I missed that is a burning question that you'd like answers for. I'm happy to, kind of go over that. I don't know if we feel like that's better to do in the chat or verbally. How do we usually do this?
In the past, it's kind of been a mix of both. So if anybody has questions and feels comfortable speaking, feel free to unmute and do that. But if you would rather type it out, I'm happy to monitor the chat as well.
Oh, there were some questions I'm now seeing. Oh no, they're comments. Okay. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question. My name is Dorianne. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. My question is, I'm really curious about photography equipment and cameras, and I have a bit of a software background, but and I work in tech support. but I know that cameras are kind of this weird in-between sphere. So I'm just curious if you have any resources on that niche in particular.
Yeah, product photography is good product photography, I should say. You know it when you see it. And then bad product photography, you also know it when you see it. It really depends on the size of the shop that you're working for. I've worked with a lot of smaller device companies, more startup-y focused places, and they'll just use like a regular old DSLR or like an iPhone. And it's more about the placement of the object and the presentation of the object than it is the quality of your camera. So think thoughtfully about the vantage point of depicting that object, right? Does it have a lot of complicated pieces on the top of it? Maybe you want a top-down view. Does it have all black components? Is it just like solid black plastic with a lot of ridges and bevels? Then, you can use something called a shot box, which is like a white box, for lack of a better word, that you can put it on that provides contrast with lighting that makes it a little easier to see all of those kind of specific little pieces and details in the product. And then once you take the picture, you can make notations from the technical writing side, right? Like maybe figure A is this view, and you need to know what that looks like to put these two pieces together. But once those two pieces are together, that's not as important. And then you can shift it and figure B is on the others, right? I don't have a list for you of like resources to go read about it. It's not my forte, but I would say it's similar to those technical drawings that I talked about. It's showing people how to do things, but depending on who you're working with, it's also marketing the product. So you might look into marketing photography resources as well, rather than technical writing photography resources. They're going to teach you how to make it look flattering, how to act it in a way like that is really good for capturing what the is.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Thank you.
Nice. And then Lisa, thank you for that answer. That was great. I think everybody. Megan Wagner also put in the chat, I do some indexing in addition to other work. Do you have any advice for getting into indexing things like manuals, or do you know of any resources?
Could you describe for me how you're using the term index? Making sure I understood. So it depends on the size and the type of the shop. Like when I have written product manuals for companies, that's part of what I do in writing product, right? That index comes, like I make the entire document from start to finish, and then the index goes in the back based on what I've made. I will say that in software, honestly, that's something that is auto-generated at this point. I would not consider it an individual. It's the tools will read that markdown language that I talked about. Headers will have certain code elements to them, and then everything that is tagged with that element in the code will appear in an index in the end, and all you have to do is just generate, and it spits out an index with citations and tables. So if you're doing this for something like, yeah, she's listing something. I mean, maybe there's an application here that I'm not aware of, but like referencing and cataloging that material in my experience has not been something that's like the only thing that you do. But if it is, I'm curious to click on this and see. Brandy asked, how could you market yourself to be an independent technical writer in order to get jobs writing for companies and organizations? This is a toughie. Again, it relates back to the situation of the economy. This is the most difficult time in our lifetime, I think, to be an independent contractor in anything, because a lot of good, very experienced folks have all been laid off and are now making a living picking up smaller clients piecemeal instead. And so if you're someone who doesn't have experience, who's trying to use this as a way to break into a field, you're now going up against those types of. I know that's not the answer you necessarily want to hear, but that's the reality of where we are, right? So I would say, one, have a good website. Clearly and very effectively depict what you do show examples of what you do. If you do have clients, even if it's a few, client testimonials can be really helpful in saying like, oh, I worked with John Smith and they were great. They delivered in, fraction of the time. Their rates were affordable. I'm very happy with the quality of the product, and then link to it if they're comfortable with it so that they can see the examples. If you've got nothing, make up those examples. Like I said, make up your portfolio, kind of role play those scenarios, pretend, build things. If you're just handing out a business card to people that says like, I'm John Smith and I'm a technical writer, that's not good. You need them to see the product so that they can believe in what you do. Networking is also a huge part of this. Those communities I mentioned, but you can also, in Philly at least, apologies for everyone who's not in Philly, there's a lot of meetups that you can go to just shake hands and kind of meet people and say like, hey, I do this thing in 6 months, maybe you should think about me. And then go home, make a note, LinkedIn message that person in 6 months and be like, I'm following up. How are you doing? Could you use my services? You have to be a little more go-getter in this economy to kind of do stuff. And sometimes people are really busy and they're like, yeah, actually, I'd love to talk. And other times they just won't answer your message. On to the next one.
And then I think there's probably time for one more quick question. And Dana, you've had the hand emoji thing up. Do you have a question you want to ask?
I do. Thank you. Yes, I'm Dana. How much copy editing experience do copywriters or technical writers need to have for these positions? I come from the copy editing side of things, and I see a lot of postings that advertise, we need a copy editor, and then it turns out, no, it's actually a writing job. So I'm curious if you experience that on the other side of things, where they, are hiring for a writer, but a lot of your job is actually copy editing.
So again, it depends on the size of the shop. If it's a small company, it's very undesirable to say, that's not my job, that's not what you do. The answer should be like, yes, how high can I jump? If it's a bigger company and you're further along in your career and you've specialized, I think then you can say like, but I really do this particular thing, right? Smaller companies, in my experience, don't know the difference. A lot of times they will think a technical person also edits and also does this and also does these things. If you specialize, you want to make it really clear up front that that's what you do and that's all you do. You can ask thoughtful questions about that in the interview to get a sense of if they have that idea about the position. Be like, could you describe for me the process of the work product, right? Would I be responsible for drafting it? Would I be taking someone else's draft and editing it and submitting it to someone else? Like ask specific questions that give you a sense of what the job is, even if they're using inappropriate terms to describe it. Have found in bigger companies, and this relates to pay grades, a lot of times there'll be like a copy editor 2 or technical writer 3. Those types of titles will mean different things for them, and they're much more rigid. Like if you try to go outside of that, they're like, no, we have a team in Madagascar that does this. That's not your job. So I would say, to sum up, think about the size of the company. Ask questions when you're talking to them to get a sense of what it is. But also try to just understand like it's different everywhere. I know that's a difficult answer, but pure copy editing versus copy editing works other people made. It depends on the history of the company, funding of the company, the size of the company, just the complete situation.
Follow-up question. So if copy editing is a skill that technical writers need to have, are there specific things that, okay, so I'm on the board of the Editorial Freelancers Association, and we offer loads of educational opportunities. Are there things that we should be targeting when we offer copy editing training, perhaps for people who are going into the technical fields?
The ability to follow a style guide. I think that's a really good core beginner skill. So the PDF that you're going to get from this, you'll have a link to both Google and Microsoft. Have them do an exercise where they take somebody's writing that does not follow that style guide, have them read certain call-out sections from that style guide, and then make those edits. Because understanding those particular things in a technical sense means understanding what the UI elements are. Like if the direction from Google is all different types of UI elements should be bolded. code snippets should be communicated in this particular way, right? They need to know what a code snippet means. They need to know what an element is. Like, to read that particular guidance, they're going to need some training on what the lingo is. Once they can do that, I think they'd be better equipped for any situation, whether it was, we wrote this document, edit it, or I need you to write this document from scratch and then copy it, which also.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Lisa, thank you so much from everybody. That was a really wonderful presentation. Right on, everyone. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Lisa, for giving this awesome presentation and lecture and lesson and the writing exercise. Everybody, before we wrap up, I'm just going to copy and paste a few links into the chat on behalf of Blue Stoop. You all know this was a free event, but if you would like the chance to donate to Blue Stoop or support Blue Stoop in any way, there is a URL above my head. There's also a link now in the chat. There's also a link to a feedback survey. So if you would like to leave feedback on how this class went, what you enjoyed about it, that is there. There's also links to a list of upcoming Blue Stoop events and our weekly newsletter. All right, so all of those are there for you in the chat. I'll put it in one more time just to be safe. But otherwise, everyone, again, thank you for being here and have a wonderful Thursday.